Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Symphony 101, luncheon with me, John Page, the Maestro, Portsmouth Symphony Orchestra. You're very welcome. I hope you're all doing very well. Today, we start in a dramatic way. Beethoven 5. This is what we're going to talk about today. Last time we talked about Brahms 1, the idea of line, and Brahms' fear of the shadow of Beethoven being on his shoulder. And today we go back to Beethoven himself, to some would say the source, the essence. What Beethoven did for the symphony was taken from an art form that under Haydn and Mozart was the kind of staple of the classical genre, and took it through a process of development that left it as one of the most complicated and detailed and monumental genres of artistic expression. Huge development under Beethoven. And in this piece, the Beethoven Fifth Symphony, we talked about the Third Symphony a few sessions ago, but this piece really does take it to a whole nother place. He builds on what happens in the Eroica, but the level of expression, the originality that he brings to this is extraordinary. And it's the most famous four notes in the whole of music. Everybody knows it. What is it? It's frankly the most arresting start of any piece, any symphony that I know. It's literally arresting. It stops. This is what you see in the score. Okay, let's look at the strings. So that's your first bar. We'll go through this in a bit more detail, but just show you the shape of it. Just look at the shape. And the second bar, he literally stops. And then he stops again over here. This time, fourth bar, but it's actually the pauses on the fifth bar. Which is, why did he do that? There's a question that we've got to delve into at some point. But he stops the piece. He literally stops at the beginning. And this piece has been written about more than any other piece of music, probably, in the history of music. What does it mean? Beethoven reported himself as saying this is fate knocking on the door. Others have suggested it's simply not that it could be other things, that it could be Beethoven grabbing fate by the throat and taking control rather than being controlled, which is an idea that plays out through the symphony because, of course, it starts here, but it ends in this amazing C major, triumphant, victorious ending. So it goes from this darkness to light. There is an element of struggle and suffering, but ultimately victory. So that idea carries weight. It's the idea of actually controlling or taking control of fate, which Beethoven was trying to do his whole life. After 1802, when he'd gone through a depression and his deafness was taking over. He was descending into a silent world for a composer, which was the end of the world for him. He contemplated suicide. And this is kind of his way out of it. This piece started in 1804, finished in 1808. So it's slightly further on, obviously, than the Eroica, but not much further on. That's Symphony number 3. This is Symphony 5. I would point out that Symphony 5 and 6, the numbering of Beethoven's symphonies are kind of, what came first? They're numbered now the way we know them, but in the the first time this was performed, it was actually performed in the same concert as the premiere of the Sixth Symphony, Pastoral. So you had both symphonies premiered on the same night. They were first performed on the same night, December 22nd, 1808, in Vienna. In fact, that concert has gone down in history. It was a monumental, monster, huge concert. It was 4 hours long. You had the Sixth Symphony premiered, you had the Fifth Symphony premiered, you had the Fourth Piano Concerto premiered, you had the choral fantasy in there, you had parts of his C major mass, you had an aria in somewhere in the beginning, and somewhere near the end, Beethoven decided he was going to improvise on the piano as well. This was a 4-hour concert. Can you imagine what that was like back then? And it was probably freezing as well. So concerts have changed, but this was premiered in the same concert as the Sixth Symphony. So really, what is the piece about? So other people suggest that it's just simply from nature. He's heard these sometimes bird calls, or he's inspired by nature, and there's a elemental force to it. We don't really know. I think we have to make our own minds up and interpret it. But what is clear, it's shockingly original. And the first movement, which is not very long, the first movement probably is, 7 minutes running, maybe more, 8. But it uses simply this material over and over again. It's so economical in its material, and you just find this opening going the whole way through. He does not get up at all. So what do we see here? I should also point out, in this symphony, it's the first time that we have the entrance of trombones and a contrabassoon into the orchestra, also a piccolo. Just to remind us what the contrabassoon looks like, it's this big guy here. In fact, Beethoven's contrabassoon didn't look like this. If you take this and actually straighten it out and go straight into the air, it looks more like some sort of military grade weapon. That's what it would look like. This is the modern contrabassoon. Beethoven's was slightly different, but that first time bassoons in the orchestra, first time to have trombones in the orchestra, along with a piccolo. So he's constantly thinking expansion. He's bringing these things in. So what do we see at the beginning? Well, let's delve into it. So the marking he gave is allegro con brio. This has baffled this idea of what speed we take this piece at. The tempo has, I wouldn't say baffled, but has drawn so much discussion. What did Beethoven actually mean? And we'll get to that very, very soon, because that's really the essence of what I want to talk about today. We have 2 flutes, 2 oboes. Remember the layout of the orchestra. This is your winds, flutes, flutes, oboes, clarinets, bassoons. You've got 2 horns in E flat, E flat, E flat. 2 that's clarinini, which is trumpets, in C. Timpani, 2 of those in C and G, and then our strings down here, firsts, our seconds, our violas, our cellos, and our basses. And that's what you get. We talked about time signature. This is in 2. So the pulse of the piece is in 2. Ba, 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 ba. Supposedly. Key signature 3 flats, which is C minor, which is the same key as the Brahms, if you remember. 3 flats, same key, C minor, serious key. That's what you have at the beginning. That's the opening. Now, big question. What speed does the piece go at? Allegro con brio isn't the most convincing or specific. It's convincing. I mean, it's just lively, fast, with life, con brio. But there's no specifics. What speed does the piece go at? Well, here we get into it. This is the rabbit hole. And I'm going to take you down a little bit. Just hang on to the top. But this is one of the biggest questions about Beethoven performance, and especially this piece. And and some others. What speed did Beethoven intend this piece to go at? He had a metronome. The metronome was just more or less created, invented, and Beethoven got his hands on one in 1817 by a maker called Maelzel. And this is actually what it looked like. This was Beethoven's own metronome, right? So this isn't like today. Today it's very easy. You pull out your iPhone and you set your metronome going, and there it is, right? Tick, tick, tick. Very simple, right? These old things didn't work that way. They had, and I'm sure some of you know this, they had this is a metal rod, it had a weight on it, and these were numbers calibrated. So those were the metronome markings, beats per minute, and you set it going, click, 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 and it clicked, and it goes faster, slower. So it's should be a very specific way of telling people what speed you want your piece to go at. So there are a few questions here, right? Number one, does a composer, so Beethoven went back to his pieces he composed, and he went through them all, and he created metronome markings, and he did it for this piece. And what he came up with for this is that the half note, which is the 2/4, which is the full bar, should be zipping along at 108. Okay, fine. Okay. So what's the problem with that? Well, that's really fast. Really fast. And most orchestras do not play it that fast, don't want to play it that fast. Most conductors don't want to take it at that speed. It can just sound like chaos. There are lots of arguments. So before, as I say, it's a rabbit hole, so you're going to find a lot of extreme arguments on either side of this. People are saying, of course Beethoven was right. Just because he was deaf didn't mean he couldn't see it, right? Click, 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 click. So he knew what he was doing. Others saying, well, Beethoven was a bit blind, so maybe he didn't see the numbers. And then, of course, there's, okay, so you set it at 108, but does the tempo stay at that the whole way through? Or does tempo change? These are big, big questions, and they've been posed over and over and over again. Lots of different arguments on either side. Obviously, 108 is pretty specific, but the question's been brought up as to what that 108 is actually signifying. Is it the pulse? Is it the pulse of click, 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 or is the pulse two of those clicks, which would mean it would be half that speed? And there's an argument to be made that we are playing 19th century music way too fast. That we've got this idea that it should be all super fast. I kind of like Beethoven moving along quickly, but most conductors are in that area now. Tempos have changed, but not hugely. Here's a performance. I'll just play you. This is. So that is a performance by a friend of mine, Gustavo Dudamel, and it's a pretty standard tempo. This is kind of the tempo we would all use. He's at about 101. Last time I did this with the PSO, I had it around circa 100. All right, so, and you're going to find that that's kind of where people want to be. The 108 tempo is very, very fast. It's doable. It's just super fast. So we have this question about his metronome markings. He's left metronome markings for the rest of the piece. Some of them work perfectly well. No one's got any questions about them. Some of them people think it's too fast. Other pieces, they seem to be too slow. What is the problem? So there's a lot of argument, a lot of controversy over Beethoven and his metronome marking and his own machine. Was it broken? That's the other question. And if you want to go down this rabbit hole, please feel free. You will spend the entire time of probably trying to get past coronavirus obsessed by Beethoven's metronome. There's so much written about this. It's incredible. Scientific treatises into the mechanism and the incredible stuff. So if you want to go down that road, do so. I don't. I want to think more about the idea of the music and the line itself. And that's kind of where a lot of people come down on. You have to make sense of the line. It's all very well taking away the bar line, which I talked about last time. You make the bar line disappear. But let's get into the music itself. Do you see the way that it's split? This isn't one line. So over here, right, you've got the second violins, viola, first, It's split across 3 different instrument families. All of that split between these. So you're finding the line between these different instruments. But it's all about that line. And at this piece, it's written in 2. But at this speed, all the metronome markings that I've come up with, that Gustavo was doing, that even Beethoven wrote, refer to the measure, the bar, as being the unit, the pulse, tactus. This is the measure. So if that's the case, then each measure can effectively be a beat. And you get into these macro beats of da 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 1, da 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 2, da 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 3, da 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 4, da 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 1, da 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 2, da 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 da. So you've kind of got macro bars of 4. Now each bar is a beat, and then you try and make that disappear, but you still have to have a sense of phrasing, beginnings, middles, and ends. And if you take it too fast, this is where you get into trouble. So I'm kind of coming down on the same place as most of performances you will hear out there. You will find any number of performances. This is a thorny area. This is a rabbit hole. I told you that, and I'm not going to delve too deeply into it. There's all out there if you want to go and look at it. But for me, it's got to still come from the music. It has to be the sense of the music. And then the second subject, da, 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 which we didn't even get to. That's how do you make that work musically at a really fast tempo? And a lot of people don't. They just take it down a notch and make it work. You don't think the difference between 101 and 108 is that much, by the way, but it actually is. It really is. So that's the problem with Beethoven and his metronome markings and Beethoven 5. There's so much more to talk about in that piece. But before I do, and that will be more than likely my next video, is going through Beethoven 5 as I will do it as a pre-concert talk, which if you come to our concerts, you'll know. So I will kind of set up a format like that and talk about the whole piece and what it means and why we perform it. Because here's a little teaser. The beginning of next season is going to open with this piece, with Beethoven 5. I think it's an ideal piece for us to start with. So before we get into that, which will be the next video, I just want to leave you with one further thought about Beethoven and his tempos and what he left us, and what therefore we what information we have to base our interpretations on. We have the metronome markings, but we have all this controversy over the metronome markings. Are they right? Are they wrong? Are they half a tempo? Was the metronome broken? Was Beethoven so deaf he couldn't see it? That goes on and on. Ultimately, music has to, as an interpreter, as a performer, we, musicians, have to make decisions. And they have to be musical decisions. It has to make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, it's never going to be convincing. If nothing doesn't make sense to us, it's never going to be convincing to our audience. Here's another piece, and I'll just briefly go into this, but we all know it. Forgive a few extra notes in there, but it's the Moonlight Sonata. It's Sonata number 14, Opus 27, number 2, C sharp minor, Moonlight Sonata. And that's the way we hear it. It's always played that way. That's tradition. It's kind of what we expect now. When our expectations of the piece, when we hear the Moonlight Sonata from the first movement, that's what we expect. Here's the question I have. And this is not my idea. This idea came to me from my teacher, mentor, Benjamin Zander. He was always thinking about music. Ben's thoughts on Beethoven. He's just constantly thinking about what does it mean? What were we left? What information were we left, and what does it mean? And here's a case in point. Look at the beginning. What do you have? Adagio sostenuto. You see up there it says Sonata quasi una fantasia. And at the beginning, you've got your key signature and your time signature, which is a C with a line through it. It's a C, there's a line through it. Now, as musicians, we interpret that as being half time. A C is common time, so basically a C represents 4 beats in a bar. 4 beats in a bar. With the C, with the line through it, it means you're cutting it in 2. So you should be feeling 2 beats in the bar. Right? Half the tempo. When you also think about this, the upper line, which we hear dun 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 dun, often felt as the real main line of this. But is it really? Or is this the line? Is that the line? It could be a line. It could be a musical line. It could be a melody, in which case we have to make sense of it. So the question is, have we been playing this piece wrong all the time? Should it be literally twice as fast? Which would be weird, right? It'd be like this. Before you all go crazy, it's just a question. It's just a question I have. And some of the one other piece of information that we know is that the moonlight, the term moonlight, Mondlicht, was not Beethoven. It was added by a publisher. He would never have known what moonlight was. He would have sonata quasi una fantasia, sonata as in a fantasy. That's what he would have known it as. But we've got this moonlight thing now because the publisher probably thought that would sell, and it does. And has that informed the way in which we play it? And have we ignored some of Beethoven's information to subscribe to that image? Interesting questions. That's all I'm asking. I'm not giving answers. I'm not saying that's the way I want to hear it played, because to be honest, it's not. But are we missing something? Is Beethoven right? Should we be paying more attention to actually what's written? So there's a conflict. We have to be truthful to the composer. We are the composer's advocate as a conductor and as musicians, but we also have to interpret it. We have to make musical sense. There needs to be a balance between these things. And ultimately, you have to make a decision as to what makes musical sense for you so it can be convincing to an audience. And that's the key. And it's hard. And it takes a lot of thought and work and digging into things and thinking about things. But ultimately, you do have to make a decision. And once you do, you then have to perform it in that way as convincingly as possible to try and persuade your audience that interpretation is valid. So that's a kind of whirlwind tour of Beethoven and the interpretive problems that we have when we approach it, the issues, concerns, challenges. So next time, I'm going to continue on Beethoven 5. We're going to do, as I said, I'm going to do a pre-concert talk version. So if you know what that means, I'll be talking about the piece, its relevance, its context, and also what you should be listening for. So that will be up next time. Until then, please stay safe, look after each other, and thank you for watching.